Here we are, Palace of Mopu. I know I can make a success of the new convent.
I don't think you're ready for it. Mopu is a wild place.
My father used to allow some bad goings on here. You're only human.
So I'm discovering. It has started. This is an unusual place, and we should expect unusual things. What's happening to me? The devil is in you, sister.
Black Narcissus on BBC One and iPlayer.
Hello, welcome. My name's Rowan Woods and I'm the series and episodic programmer for the London Film Festival at the BFI. I'm really excited to be hosting this panel discussion for the new BBC and FX miniseries Black Narcissus, adapted from the 1939 novel by Rumer Godden. I'm really pleased to be joined by screenwriter Amanda Coe, director and cinematographer Charlotte Bruce Christensen, Gemma Arterton, who plays Sister Clodagh, Aisling Franciosi, who plays Sister Ruth, and Dipika Kunwar, who plays Kenshi. Welcome all. So Amanda and Charlotte, just because I'm aware that people may be watching this conversation before they've had a chance to watch the series, and there may still be people out there who aren't familiar with the 1949 film version. Perhaps you could just start by setting up the plot, giving us any outlines that you'd like to share before we go into the discussion.
Should I go for a little synopsis? So the story of Black Narcissus is about a group of Anglo-Catholic nuns in the 1930s who travel from Darjeeling to the Himalayas to set up a mission, a school and a clinic at an abandoned palace in a place called Mopu. And it all starts to go wrong from there, really. They're led by Sister Clodagh, who's the youngest sister superior in the order, and this is her big chance to prove herself, which she's very keen to do. And there's a group of nuns with them, among whom is Sister Ruth, who is very early on clearly going to be a challenge to Clodagh. And I think that's probably all you need to know to kick the story off.
That's perfect. And as I mentioned, it was the book was previously adapted into a film directed by Powell and Pressburger in 1947, and inevitably that film looms very large over any attempt to engage with this material. And any new adaptation sort of needs to feel like it's really bringing something new to the table. And I wonder why, to you, Amanda, why this material was so compelling to you, and why you felt like it was ripe for reinterpretation.
Well, I have to say that when DNA, the production company, approached me about possibly readapting Black Narcissus, I was really familiar with the film, which I love, and I hadn't read the book. And when I read the book, I felt very strongly that it really deserves to be known more widely in its own right. And obviously, any new version needs to acknowledge the status of the film, which is a masterpiece, but also the fact that the book creates this very female world that I think, perhaps the nuances of that weren't necessarily in the film version. And the fact that it was filmed in the 1940s, a film set in northern India, in Nepal, in the Himalayas, which had one ethnically Indian actor in the cast, and that felt that's something that a new version obviously would deal with very differently, and the opportunity to actually film in some of the locations that are in the book.
And I think as you mentioned, it's it's a tale of repression and female desire, and which is quite a sort of modern and daring topic for a book in sort of 1939, and perhaps something that we can sort of explore with a little bit more explicitly now, and certainly more so than a film in the 1940s could. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about sort of how you tease those themes out.
Well, I think that the book is remarkably sort of upfront about its themes, actually. I think that the film probably romanticized those themes a little more than the book does. I mean, it certainly was the case that I think when the film was shown in America, they had to cut out the references to Clodagh's past life, pre-nun life. And obviously we can deal with those more explicitly, that she's somebody who's not just experienced sexual desire, but has experienced sex, without having to kind of foreground it just matter-of-factly. And I think the interaction between Clodagh and Mr. Dean, and what Mr. Dean's sexuality and how that expresses itself, it's just much easier to deal with that now. I mean, it's there in the book, but again, in the film, it had to kind of pull back from that.
And of course, you're now telling the story over 3 hours in a miniseries format, which immediately gives you much more room to breathe and to sort of delve into backstories or into subplots. What sort of opportunities did you feel that as a writer that extra time and that sort of space opened up for you?
I think to maybe give a little bit more room to character, and to allow the performances to breathe in a bit more detail, and allow something, although it's all very heightened, and that's one of the appeals of the story, that it's this kind of, in some ways, melodramatic story, that it does kind of proceed through these very small, psychologically acute moments, that you're building up detail.
And Charlotte, I'd love to bring you in here. This is your first project as a director, although of course you're a very well-established cinematographer, on films like A Quiet Place, Girl on the Train, Far From the Madding Crowd, etc. Why did this feel like the right project as your first directorial outing?
Well, I read the scripts, and I was very, I really loved the drama. I think that from the very beginning, there was something that felt different. I had seen the 1947 movie quite a few times, because I went to film school here in England, and it's one of the ones that you sort of discuss in great detail. So, I mean, up front, I was a bit like, I'm not sure about this, but digging into the scripts, and then also reading the novel, which I hadn't done. I'd only seen the movie previously. Reading the novel and realizing that, yes, we're dealing with an old classic, but I also feel that there is, like with music, you re-record old songs because it's a different interpretation. And I think this is not, I know we call it remake, and it is, because it's the same novel, but I also think there was a really interesting, it's an interesting time to bring this subject up, and it's 70 plus years since it was made. So I think it's quite fascinating looking at it, from a modern world, or filmmakers, working in the 2020. So I really was fascinated about what is it that you would, what different angle would you look at this from? And I think there is a very important element in this, which is escape. This whole thing of escaping who you are, which I think young, not just women, but people do today through Instagram and whatever. So this whole escaping something that you're not supposed to be, or maybe doesn't, I think that deeper sort of subject I felt could be sort of looked at in a modern perspective.
And you acted as DOP as well as the director on this. Can you tell us a little bit about how you approached the look of the series? You've gone for something that really sort of pays homage to the technicolor qualities of the Powell and Pressburger film, and to Jack Cardiff's really iconic cinematography. And in some ways that must have been quite a daunting challenge to take on.
Absolutely. I mean, it was obviously the whole look of it's been developed with our lovely production designer, Kate Quinn. And I think inspired really from, the heart of it is inspired from the novel, which you can say, well, they read the book back then, we read the book today, and it's not that different. I think what was important to me was to not make it different just to make it different, but to stay true to the novel and the scripts that, you know, the adaptation that Amanda had written, and to feel that. So, because I've had that question, you know, is it different enough? Well, it's the truth to what we wanted to do and to the scripts that we did. And yeah, it doesn't fall, but it's the same story, you know. So I think it was very important to stay true and not keep sort of reminding ourselves what that was. And then, you know, I think it was also important for me and for the team, filmmakers, to honor the old piece. And for that reason, we also, you know, there's 3 or 4 specific shots that's quite similar to what it was, like the close-up of the lipstick and Ruth opening the doors and high angle of Clodagh, which is sort of iconic images. And I think I loved that idea of making those to sort of honor that film and not compete with what that was, but to say, you know, that was so beautiful in its own, and it's not like we're going to make something better. We're going to look at it, you know, with different eyes. So, you know, it's a little sort of tribute to say that was beautiful, and it sort of fits in our world as well. But yeah, it was obviously daunting to know that Jack Carter's just done the most amazing thing. So, but it lived in that, I don't want to say Technicolor, but in a rich world. Because it when you read the novel, and I also think it's in the scripts, this whole thing of color that, you know, the locals bring into the film, the characters, Kanchi, you know, Dilip Rai, they bring such color to it. And so that needed to be represented against, you know, the paleness and the whiteness of our nuns. So, you know, it's not like I felt we could go towards something much more muted or something just to be different. It had to have that color, like they did in the old movie. Is true to the story. So I think I tried to watch the old movie and say, all right, well, let's put it here, and then try and interpret it, you know, the way we saw color in our piece.
And in many ways, that use of colour and that really kind of heightened visual language is very much the mode of melodrama, you know, something that we don't tend to see a huge amount of in contemporary film and TV drama. And, you know, I imagine sort of making melodrama work for a modern audience was part of the challenge. You know, it is a piece that's very much about very heightened emotional states, and combining that with, I suppose, the psychological realism that a contemporary audience expects is a sort of a fine line to tread.
It is, but also it's an old-fashioned story, and it's a slow burn. You know, it's like opening a book. We start here. They get the mission. Clodagh get her mission. They go off. They get there, and then we need to learn about the place, which also is, you know, the palace is a character in itself. So, you know, it had to have that rhythm of starting on page 1, which is an old fashioned. You know, today you have so many sort of like starting with the end, and then you figure out, oh, that was a dream, and we don't have that. It's a very linear story, which I really enjoyed. And I hope there's still room for that, you know, in cinema and in TV these days, to actually sort of open the book at page 1. So I really loved it, and I think we find a different pace. I don't feel that this sort of that the slow burn is necessarily a slow start. I feel like we're still sort of pushing it towards, you know, getting to that palace. So I loved it. I love starting at page 1.
Yeah, it really, really gives the story and the characters room to breathe. That, you know, that by the time you get to episode 3, right, really pays off. And before we move on and sort of talk a little bit more, you know, bring Gemma and Dipika and Aisling into the conversation, I'd just love to ask you a little bit about, I suppose, the practical challenges of, you know, of directing actors sort of for the first time in this situation, whilst also acting as DP. How did that work?
Well, I loved it because I had the most amazing team of cast members, and I'm not just saying this, that it really was a wonderful collaboration, and we started off having some really wonderful meetings at my house, sort of around the table, and everybody bringing their journeys and what they interpreted from the scripts, because there is so much in the scripts and in the novel. There's all these journeys that are unspoken and sort of hidden in the beginning, but comes through in little moments. And when do we let go of that? And when do we let go of that? And also each nun, each one of them have a journey towards some internal reaction that needs to come out that you see in episode 3. So you need to sort of have little little pockets of feeling that in moments. So I loved it, and I had amazing help and support from the entire cast, and also I think we were off to a very lovely beginning, because we started by going to Nepal, which means that we had a couple of weeks together, sort of really bonding and getting more time to chat and things like that. So I absolutely loved it, but I have to give the credits to this wonderful cast.
And let's bring them in. Gemma, what was it about Sister Clodagh and this story that you found so compelling?
I wasn't familiar with the film, and I wasn't familiar with the book, so I sort of came at it with fresh eyes, and so I just could maybe take it for what it was. And I read the script and I read the book, and I loved Sister Clodagh. I guess I identified with her kind of desperation to succeed and the struggle with this other side of her, which is this very sort of not wild but free-spirited person, carefree person. And she's sort of shut all of that down in order to become the nun, the perfect person, in the eyes of God. And I identified with that, and I really felt for her. And I thought that it was such a nuanced adaptation from Amanda in terms of what she goes through and how she relates to everybody, and the struggle that she feels with everybody. I mean, every single character she has some sort of struggle with, and that's because she has this internal conflict of she's not really being her true self at any time. So I thought she was a really interesting, compelling character, and I liked to show more of her of her warmth. I felt maybe that wasn't as apparent in the film, and I felt that it was so apparent in the script. So there were many things, but I remember just feeling very I remember meeting Charlotta for a chat about it, and we were supposed to only meet for 20 minutes, and we ended up talking for 2 hours because there was so much in the story that excited us. I think it spoke to us both for reasons I don't know why. Sometimes that happens.
Sister Bryony, she will be indispensable to you up there in the mountains.
Will the order really be able to manage without her?
We'll have to. And Sister Philippa, you will do well to lean on Philippa, not just for the garden or the laundry, but for her wisdom.
Yes, Reverend Mother. And might we take Sister Blanche for the little ones?
Oh, Sister Honey, yes, do. Better honey than vinegar in such a closed community. And Sister Ruth. Like you, God has blessed her with an abundance of talents. And St. Helens found her a very quick study in languages, and she's experienced in lace work. Do you wish to express a reservation, Sister Clodagh?
No, Mother Dorothea. Except Sister Ruth seems to wish so much to be important.
Then you have a great deal in common.
I think, you mentioned that I think this series gives a much greater opportunity to really dig into, her backstory, but also, her crisis of faith and, the conflict that she has maybe between her ambition and, her need to sort of also be the perfect nun.
Yeah, I mean, just like often when you read a book, you have 40 hours or whatever to read the book, or, 3 if you're super, super quick. You have that time to really, really fall into the character and get to know them and all those tiny things. And often the film length format doesn't allow for that much detail. So I was it was great. We got the time to really explore all of those things, often which are unsaid, and have the time to, you know, especially in this world with where the nuns they can't really say certain things, they can't touch, they can't. A lot of the drama is in, or the communication even is in looks and silences. So I felt like this miniseries format worked really well for that, just giving us a little bit more time to play those moments out. I always love a pregnant pause, so we have some in this.
And there's another. Dipika, you played the role of Kanchi, which is also actually greatly expanded from the previous adaptation. I think actually Gene Simmons doesn't have any lines at all in the previous version. Can you tell us a little bit about just how that character sort of fits into the narrative before we go any further?
I think Kanchi's role is to give a little bit of contrast to what the nuns are going through, and she's free-spirited and she doesn't have these rules and boundaries that she has to follow. At the same time, she kind of reminds Sister Clodagh of who she was when she was younger, to some extent. The youthfulness, the freedom, and everything that she's left behind is now in front of her. So I think that's what I bring. That's what Kanchi brings, and it is elaborated way more than how it was in movie, as you said.
And her presence really helps to stir up some of the sort of repressed sexual appetites, or a sense of what desire might actually look like amongst the nuns, doesn't it?
Yeah, all the sneaking around with Dilip Rai and everything, and then being caught, and then putting Clodagh into a dilemma of like Sister Clodagh knowing that something is happening, but should I let it happen, or should I step in? What should I do, kind of thing. So I think that's the dynamic that, especially with Sister Clodagh, that I bring. And with Sister Ruth, it's more like she's annoyed with me. So it's like I kind of give her that. It's almost like jealousy that Sister Clodagh sort of adores Kanchi in the way Sister Ruth would have wanted the approval of Sister Clodagh. So yeah.
And I think, am I right in thinking this is your first ever acting role?
Yes,
it is. How
is.
did you find that in at the deep end?
Ooh, it was amazing. I was really nervous in the auditions, and then once I got it and I got to the rehearsals, I was super nervous on day one, and I was in there, like I was sharing the car with Karen, and she calmed me down before we walked in, and she was like, "You always get nervous, no matter year one when you begin, or 20 years down the line, you always get nervous, and nerves are good things." I was like, okay. And then I went in, I met everyone, they were lovely, and then it was easy after that.
And you're Nepalese yourself in terms of your
Yes.
of your background, and did that feel significant to you, to be playing a Nepalese character?
Yes, it did. Also, I loved the fact that everyone listened as well. When one particular moment with Charlotta was when we were discussing the jewelry and everything, and I said this would be something that a married Nepalese woman would wear, and not like a young girl would be wearing it. But we had all of that during the screen test, and then she listened to me, and she actually, in the end, we didn't go with any of that, and that was a scary moment to bring it up in the beginning, but to have it welcomed, a suggestion in even with costume designers and everyone who are experts in this, it sort of makes you feel easier. So yeah,
And I think actually it comes back to something, Amanda, you sort of touched on right at the start, was a real sort of cultural sensitivity around the project. It is inherently to a certain extent a sort of colonial story that is told or has been told previously through a very white Western lens. And I think it's very fair to say that as revered as the Powell and Pressburger film is, one of the things that really hasn't stood the test of time is some of that sort of cultural sensitivity. And I wondered sort of how you as a writer and as a director and sort of cast were navigating that, and the sort of the challenges of avoiding a colonial gaze whilst telling this story, and sort of whilst still seeing it through the nun's eyes, allowing a sort of space for the Nepalese characters and for that for sort of cultural representation.
Well, I think what you say is very true about the the time gap that exists between us now and the film and even the book as well. But one of the things that's really brilliant about the book is it's about how colonial values drive people mad, that they involve a kind of something that's anti-rational and dangerous and ultimately deathly. It's all there in the story. It's I think finding the context for it within the story was really a concern for everybody all the way through, and kind of shooting in Nepal obviously was incredibly key to that. As Charlotte was saying, everybody got a sense of a sense of the place and of what the impact would be on the Western characters coming into that. And having the extended format, there was always a sense that it would allow for an amplification of the world, of the village, and like Kanshi's character, Dilip Rai's character. The fact that the general, unlike in the book, in our version, he is much more a kind of colonial instrument. So he's kind of assimilated the values that the British have brought to him. So, yeah, there was a lot of discussion at every point about, you can't pretend it isn't a story about the effect of that environment on these Western characters. But the story embodies that difficulty and those conflicts.
Absolutely. I mean, as much as anything, the failure of the nuns project is very much an allegory for the end of empire and the sort of waning colonial authority. Absolutely.
And I mean, the film came out in the year of partition, so that how that must have played, that sense of them packing up and leaving, it must have been quite powerful at the time that the film came out. I mean, for us, we just have a very different view of what that meant and the legacy that it left. But it's at one level a story about the failure of a colonial project. So, yeah.
Aisling, let's bring you in here. It's Sister Ruth is perhaps the showiest role of all, and you get to sort of run the full gamut of emotions and sort of go from being very kind of meek to really quite mad. And again, there's sort of a challenge in there, I suppose, in really embracing the sort of operatic nature and melodramatic nature of her unraveling, whilst keeping it really firmly rooted in something sort of real and psychological.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was part of the conversations we'd had in prep about how we wanted it to feel very much like Ruth wasn't just a mad character from the start. And she's written beautifully by Amanda as well. And Charlotte and I decided to add to that by kind of having discussions about how we wanted it to seem, as you say, very much a psychological issue, as opposed to, as I say, just painting her as the difficult mad one from the very beginning. I really wanted to try and make Ruth kind of a sympathetic character in a way. I was hoping, I still hope, that people feel sorry for her by the time they get to the end of the story, because it's easy when someone is a difficult personality, I think, as she's described, that they can just be the ones that it's easy to hate. And I think my job as an actor is to come into it and think, okay, well, if I'm not going to show this character humanity, who is? So I have to try and find it and bring that out. And it was a fine balance that sometimes I was a little bit scared of, but I knew that I was in good hands, so I kind of trusted that they would choose the right takes or whatever, because sometimes it was tricky knowing just how far to push her moments of detachment or borderline lunacy or her anger with Clodagh. And so it was a challenge. I like to map things out before coming to a role. But as you say, part of the joy of playing it in the context of the story is that there was room for a little bit of melodrama. And I think that if you, in the character, try and keep things as truthful as possible in the context of the melodrama, then it works. So hopefully people will agree.
So, Sister Ruth is, of course, really struggling with her own attraction to Mr. Dean and, with jealousy, but it's also as much about, the loss of identity and the repressive regime of the religious order.
Yeah, I actually think that that's what I focused on most. I thought that Ruth was an extremely lonely character. Not only in the story is she isolated, they're in this vast beauty, but a complete isolation, essentially, or near isolation anyway. But within the group of nuns as well, I think she feels isolated, she feels misunderstood, and I think she feels shunned in a way too. She wants, as you say, the rules and regulations of being in this convent kind of go against everything that she's searching for. It requires them to kind of, I guess, in a way, strip themselves of their identity and just focus very much on being in service to God. And she wants to prove herself to Sister Clodagh, which in itself is something she shouldn't be trying to do. She shouldn't be trying to prove herself to anyone or look for validation. And I think this idea that you don't need external validation of any kind, whether that's just the love of friends and family, or saying that you're worthy of something, to be without that is quite difficult. And she, every time she tries to get it from Clodagh, is chastised in a way, and is made to feel further and further away from the person she thought she was in Clodagh's eyes. And I want to make sure that her kind of obsession with Mr. Dean was born out of this missing relationship amongst the females, as opposed to it just being driven mad by a man. And so the only person who she thinks is paying her any attention to what she's saying or is seeing her is Mr. Dean, and so she latches on to that. But I don't think it's, of course she's experiencing these feelings for him, and he's quite a sensual, earthly man, and so there are all those things that come into play. But it's, I think, really comes from feeling like she doesn't have a place within this group of women, and so kind of puts all of that on Mr. Dean, and hoping that he's going to be the one who saves her from it ultimately, which I'm going to leave it at that.
And I think it's fair to say that, through each of these three characters that we're talking about, Sisters Clodagh and Ruth and Kanchi, the series really explores the limited roles available to women, both within a patriarchal society, but also very specifically within the Christian faith, and, the way their desires are sort of curtailed or forbidden or sort of weaponized or pathologized.
Yeah, absolutely. Even I know it's a religious thing, but I think as well it goes further than that, and it's for a religious way of keeping the women in check is the very way that they're dressed. They keeping custody of the eye, so they can always be in service to God, but also this very sexless cloak that they wear, the defeminization, I think, of the women in the church. That's something that I think you see in this too. And that, I think, goes back to what I was saying before, was that I really didn't want to make, and I don't think it's written that way, which is great. Like, it's not that these women are just derailed by a man showing up, they're derailed by by their very own inner traumas and their previous lives and their own struggles and their own power struggles within this female group. And I really appreciated that, because I didn't, I think possibly there could have been a road to go down where it was just that suddenly a man showed up and everything went wrong. But I'm glad that we didn't go down that route.
Shouldn't have come here, you know. It's an impossible place for a nunnery.
Difficult, perhaps, but nothing is impossible with God. Is it our religion that distresses you, Mr. Dean, or the fact that we're women?
Both. Perhaps you should make a list of works. We'll need to arrange builders for you and workers to clear the garden.
Thank you, but the General's already put his clerk at our disposal.
Well, am I? Man's a rogue. He only got the job because his family bribed the General's aide.
You seem perfectly helpful on the journey. In any case, the General wrote to say that he's sending another man along. Joseph Anthony. I understand your main duties are at the tea factory, Mr. Dean, so you really needn't go to any
Please
trouble.
yourself. It suits me to have as little to do with you as possible. I'm only following the General's orders.
We all rub along perfectly well up here. Hindus, Buddhists, atheists.
You're like a row of clocks ticking away, winding yourselves up every day with your little keys, taking care to sound the hours in a place where time doesn't even exist.
Of course time exists. This is another country, not another world. I can see you're rather sentimental, Mr. Dean. Like all cynics.
What if you change your mind? Angry knows where to find me.
And let's talk a little bit about shooting in both Pinewood and Nepal. Which bits, I know people are always interested in this sort of thing. Which bits were shot on location, and which bits did you shoot in Nepal? Charlotte, perhaps I'll come to you on this.
Well, everything that is everything walking to and from. So the journey from Darjeeling and getting to Mopu is shot in Nepal. And all journeys from the palace going down to Mr. Dean, and we actually built Mr. Dean's bungalow in Nepal. So all the exteriors around Mr. Dean's is in Nepal. And all walking the mountain and all that is on, and the end scene we shot in Nepal on day 2. So I think that sort of being in the environment around the palace is actually we try to get as much as possible of that in Nepal. And then the palace and the Holy Man is sort of the border of the world that we've built here in England.
And Gemma and Dipika and Aisling, how was it for you shooting in Nepal? Did it help sort of with the performances, or sort of help to sort of immerse you in the culture, or sort of maybe just the altitude? How was that, Gemma?
Yeah, I'm so grateful that we got the chance to do that at the beginning of the shoot as well, because it's one thing sort of looking at pictures and, but it's another thing actually being there. As the absolute majesty of the Himalayas really does take your breath away. And I think it's a big theme in the book is about questioning, God is everywhere. And yet at the same time, we're meant to keep our gaze inward. We're not supposed to look at the mountain. We're not supposed to take in this godliness all around us. And I think when they get to Mopu, that challenges them. And so we really got to experience that. But at the same time, just the lengths that we went to get to the final destination, it really put into perspective how difficult it must have been for these nuns to do what they did, and the devotion. And we were well looked after. We had blankets and but it is extreme. The temperatures drop dramatically at night, and you're out there on your own. The altitude gets you. And I remember we had a party one night and we were all dancing outside, and none of us had anything to drink, but we all got really hyperactive because the air is so thin that you just get really dizzy. It was quite fun. But yeah, it was a blessing. And also the culture clash as well. There was one day where we went to one of the oldest monasteries in Nepal, and and we were all dressed as nuns when we went there, and it was so important to feel that the Westerners coming into this completely different culture, because that's another huge theme in the book, is this, you know, these ancient cultures that are really beyond our comprehension as Westerners in terms of how wise they are, and suddenly these people come in with all these rules and regulations and sort of silly things, trivial things, and that was really great to even just get a tiniest taste of that by being in the real place.
And of course, the rest was shot in Pinewood, which is also where the Powell and Pressburger film was shot. Charlotte, did you feel any sense of pressure around that?
Oh yes, every time we went to have a meeting, there's a meeting room at Pinewood, there was like 4 beautiful pictures of Powell Pressburger shooting this film on the way, and you're like, oh my gosh, just reminding you about the classic, and it's such a beautiful movie, so. But I think we all sort of try to keep it in, as Aisling was saying, and keeping it with what we felt, and I think that's also just very keen to sort of just comment a little bit on Aisling's, because this whole thing of bringing the true personalities into it and portraying this whole thing of how rules sort of get in the way of humanity. What Ruth, and we were talking a lot about that, Aisling and I, was like, well, Ruth is a real character. She's lonely, and there are moments where it could go 2 ways. If you just want to give her a hug, she just wants attention and be told, what, you're a good singer, or you're good at your lace work, or and you really just want to give her a hug. And we sort of worked in those minimalistic terms, whereas Clodagh, want to give her a hug, but when she can't because the rules gets in the way and you can't touch, there's all these little things that just step by step makes these people go mad. And that journey from being actually, there's a chance for Ruth to go on in life and have a nice life, but these things just gets in the way, and that sort of scared Clodagh. So this whole thing of sort of playing the characters up against each other, because that scares Clodagh. She doesn't know what to do with Ruth when she reacts that way. So it was just this sort of the minimalistic things, the small things that gets in the way. Which it was lovely to sort of develop those journeys with each character. And I, obviously with Clodagh, we had so many, conversations about how that forcing yourself to be something and the, wanting to be so perfect, which is another thing. I think this world today, with men and women, we want to be so perfect mom who's both doing full-time job and having 4 kids and perfect birthday cakes, and this perfection that is impossible, trying to control the world. And anyway, lots to say.
And I suppose just one thing that we haven't touched on thematically is, that it's also a story of characters who are haunted by the past, and by ghosts, sort of metaphorical or potentially literal, and each of them struggling in their own way to sort of navigate and own their own history. How important was sort of that thematic interpretation for you, versus perhaps the more rational story of the sort of psychological impact of institutional repression, etc., or perhaps it's a sort of mix of both? Amanda, perhaps that's one for you. Oh, Charlotte.
No, you can go, Amanda.
Well, I felt it was really integral to writing the scripts that Ruth's the character that connects to the past of the palace and the place, because she doesn't have much personal history, and you can in a sense see her haunting as a kind of projection of the feelings that she unconsciously has no ownership of, whereas Clodagh is haunted by her own past and her repression of her own true memories about who she really is. I think the book itself, it's a really kind of powerful and subtle examination of how you relate, how identity is formed through history, and how it's important to have a sense of your both, you know, personal history and cultural history, and know where you sit with that. And of course, it just gives the whole thing about the kind of past of the palace. I mean, it was something that in this adaptation we really amped up, because there is this wonderfully kind of Gothic thread that's implicit in it that really lends itself to seeing it on screen, and that Ruth's the most obvious character to connect to that.
Well, I think we'll leave it there, and just to say thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. It's been really great, and you know, congratulations on the really wonderful show. Black Narcissus will air on BBC One at 9 p.m. on the 27th, 28th and 29th of December. Thanks so much. If you enjoyed this event, please consider donating to the BFI. We are a charity, and our venues were closed during this most recent lockdown, so your support helps keep us open. Thank you for watching, and good night.